I guess there are people who would be listening to this that might not be out and out teachers that might be interested. Would you be able to explain what that theory is and why it's so important to teachers?
I guess if you had to summarize it, it's about optimizing your communication, the information you present, so it doesn't overload students' working memory. Working memory is limited in the sense that it can only hold a certain amount of information. The goal of teaching is to transfer information to long-term memory, and so it's encoded, and it's remembered, and then you can retrieve it. So it's that transfer where learning happens. So if long-term memory doesn't change, learning doesn't happen.
We all good to go?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, good to go.
Awesome. All right, Jamie Clark, welcome to Scotch College and welcome to the Range Project.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'd also like to thank and welcome Richard Spence, our Director of Teaching and Learning here at Scotch, for joining us today. So thanks, Richard, for coming along.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Now, before we get into this quite incredible book that many of us have been discussing prior to the podcast beginning, this Teaching One Pages book that you've produced, which is absolutely fantastic. Love it. Before we get into that, could you give us a little bit of a potted history of the evolution of your educational background, why you got into it, where you started, and a bit about where you are now as an educator?
Yeah. Well, the story starts. I'm from the UK, in case you haven't guessed. I've been teaching, it's my 16th year now in education, so it's gone really quickly. I taught in a secondary school in the UK for 6 years as an English teacher. And then with the conditions of the UK, I suppose, in terms of being monitored and watched in the classroom, which Richard will know in terms of Ofsted been coming in and the pressures of teaching in the UK, my wife and I, who was also a teacher, decided to move to Australia. And I became a teacher here as well, where I also essentially ran digital integration at my last school. So I've been very heavily involved with tech integration as well as part of my role, but my true passion and my true kind of day-to-day nowadays is pedagogy and teaching and learning. So just landed a great job in a new school as head of professional growth, and it's essentially my dream job because I get to work with teachers and do the fun bits that other leaders don't really get to do because they're so time poor, and I get to work with staff and do coaching, and the plan is to really drive a good culture at the school. So my day-to-day interactions are pretty much all about high impact teaching strategies in the classroom, and that's, I guess, one reason why this book emerged, because it's one of my focus areas and passions.
Now, if I take your mind back to your time in the UK, and you mentioned Ofsted and the kind of heavy observation, I guess that carries with it.
Yeah.
I've taught in London for a couple of years, way back, many years ago. But so was it this sort of overreach of that kind of observation of all teachers and too much scrutiny on what was it about the UK that you sort of were implying might have been a bit of a challenge and why you needed a change?
I think the level of accountability is a lot higher, and that can be a good thing, because teaching standards are raised. But if it's too high, if it's too overbearing, and teachers are pushed to the limits, it can affect mental health. It can affect workload. It can affect the classroom practice. So personally, I found that our school went into something called special measures, which is pretty much when Ofsted deemed the school to be inadequate, and that just put tons of pressures on the teacher in terms of having to develop lesson plans for every lesson and book scrutinies, where they'd come and check your books, or the leadership team would come around and check that you've marked your books, and they're all kind of what went well, even better if, and whatnot. So I guess it was just in total it just added up, and a lot of teachers even now still feel that pressure in the UK, and I suppose to a certain extent that exists here as well. But I think that external accountability can be a killer.
And it was brought to a head a few years ago with the tragic story of the head teacher from an Ofsted report. So
there was a head teacher who took her own life because of the pressure. And that just as a microcosm of what I'm trying to say. In a nutshell, that it can have devastating effects.
So you and if I fast forward now to your role at Mercedes, what goals have you got there in terms of growth of teachers and their performance in the classroom?
Yeah, I've got lots of plans in place. I've just started the school, so nothing's been set in stone yet in terms of we've not got things up and moving. The professional growth model, I think it's really important that everyone goes on a journey and you're not just targeting the best teachers or teachers who are underperforming. So the model which we've created it essentially accommodates everyone, and we've basically built it into our staff meetings. So we have workshops throughout each term, 4 main workshops where staff learn about learning. I think for any professional development program to work, teachers need to have an understanding of how learning happens. So we are very much, on the consensus that cognitive science is the driver for that. So we have kind of underpinned our professional development around cognitive science and the main principles around it, which are in this book as well. So, it's kind of a bit of a snapshot into what we're trying to work with there with securing attention and working memory and stuff. But we also have more of buy-in options and kind of things for teachers to volunteer for as well in our professional development model. So they are online courses that we are going to offer to our teachers through a company called Inner Drive and CPD Academy. And they're kind of snapshot PD courses that teachers can take. And we also have that informal professional development coming up as well called 15-minute forums, which are informal, casual presentations at breakfast time that teachers can be involved in. So I guess, in essence, it needs to cater for everyone, and then have a really targeted group as well. I know that you guys might have done, I think you're doing coaching, instructional coaching in your school. We're going to drive that as well as part of a focus group. So, we've got lots going on, or we will have lots going on come term 2, but it's all kind of in a bit of a framework at the minute, ready to go.
So you've got a lot going on,
yeah.
but you've also had a lot going on over the last, I don't know how many years since you've been writing these books, but this sort of second life that you've had. What was the inspiration for this book? Because it is a fantastic book. And what was the genesis of it? When did you think, I've actually got something here?
Yeah, I think probably at my old school, it's having conversations with teachers in passing about teaching. So in the profession, often there's not enough time to talk about what really matters. And I've just been speaking to Richard before about, we are at our schools to teach and be in front of the kids and do what works in the classroom. But sometimes that takes the back foot, and often we get, absorbed in other initiatives and meetings and things. So to cut to the chase and give teachers a chance to, talk about their profession and be passionate about it and spark conversations about, good practice, it essentially came out of that. So at my last school, I decided to put together a couple of 1-pagers on an A4 page, just brief information about feedback. And the reason I did that is because, we didn't have time in the day or to do a proper PD. People wanted it, I handed it out to them. They stuck it on their pin board in their offices. And it just kind of gave me the idea of, well, if it works for teachers in my school who are time poor, then other schools are also busy, right? So it's going to be pretty much a good tool for anyone to engage with who doesn't have the time in the day to really dig into the research. I think teachers often kind of confuse the idea of evidence-informed and research with dense, heavy papers and, reading into cognitive load theory in 10 studies, but it's not. It can be really practical and really concise, and that's what I've tried to do here is try, distill it down into the key points.
And that's a very difficult process. I mean, you say that, but to actually achieve it in the way that you've done it is pretty impressive. So, I mean, could you talk to that process? Picking one of I know your feedback is one you mentioned, but there's many in here. What is the process from go to woe in terms of how you deliver a 1-pager?
I think for me, it's reading. I'm just generally a passionate person about my job and about the evidence and about reading around it. So it comes from that, having a keen interest and looking into blogs and what teachers have written, and not just the experts, not just the theorists and the professors and the doctors, but also teachers who have proven to deliver a strategy in the classroom and read their blogs and how they do it, and then look at the evidence behind it. So it's a lot of investigatory work as well to kind of think about what really matters, what's linked to the evidence, and from there, it's cherry picking the best and most impactful strategies and ideas, and then distilling that into either dot points or diagrams or a very concise way of communicating the information that's not going to be a wall of text, for example. So in recent weeks, I've been looking at cognitive load theory and instructional design and how we can present information effectively to students, but also to audiences if you're doing a PowerPoint presentation and stuff. And it's very much about keeping it simple. So we were talking earlier, my presentation is called the Science of Simplicity. And that is about cutting down, walls of text. It's about putting things in bullet points, visualizing and labeling diagrams, for example, and using simple colors and backgrounds. And I think it applies to teachers in the classroom because you've all seen super busy PowerPoints that you can't keep up with. And again, walls of text and death by PowerPoint. So I've tried to kind of, steer away from that and keep things as simple and as concise as possible.
And are there any particular aspects that you cover in the book that have had particular resonance out there? The feedback that you've got where they've gone, I really like that particular concept that you've covered, perhaps more than others?
Yeah, I'd probably say cognitive load theory, primarily because it underpins pretty much everything you do in the classroom. Because if you do not take into account students' working memory, for example, and you overload them with information, they're not going to learn. It's not going to transfer. It's not going to be encoded in long-term memory. So lots of teachers are kind of recognizing cognitive load theory now and really kind of tuning into the nitty-gritty of their practice and how they can tweak their resources and their PowerPoints and their delivery instruction. So the biggest post I probably put on LinkedIn, for example, and X is the cognitive load stuff. There's a quote from Dylan William as well, who said it's the single most important thing that teachers should know is cognitive load theory, which he tweeted a few years ago, and it kind of rings true now because everyone's so thirsty to know more about it.
And I think you've obviously been mindful of cognitive load theory in the construction of this book, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's a learnt process. So I learned how to design from scratch. I've got no design background as such. I've got no degree in it. I just kind of practice. And it's taken me 2.5, 3 years to refine it. And even since this book, I've improved then. And when I've written the second volume, I've noticed after like a week, I'd draw something and then a week later it'd be better and I'd have to replace it. And it's just constantly improving your craft. And there's a message there, that practice makes permanent and you can really improve. And it's a similar message you give to students as well.
I'm just going to circle back actually because we've used the term cognitive load theory quite a lot, and we're all professional educators now. I guess there are people who would be listening to this that might not be out and out teachers that might be interested. Would you be able to explain what that theory is and why it's so important to teachers?
Yeah, in a nutshell, there's a lot to it. There's lots of effects of cognitive load, for example, like split attention effect and transient information effect and whatnot, which is kind of the the ins and outs of it. But I guess if you had to summarize it, it's about optimizing your communication, the information you present, so it doesn't overload students' working memory. Working memory is limited in the sense that it can only hold a certain amount of information. The goal of teaching is to transfer information to long-term memory, and so it's encoded, and it's remembered, and then you can retrieve it. So it's that transfer where learning happens. So if long-term memory doesn't change, learning doesn't happen. And as Daniel Willingham said, I don't know if you're a fan of Daniel Willingham like myself, that memory is the residue of thought. So we have to get students to think in class and not be passive. So essentially, it's about communicating information in an optimal way to transfer learning to long-term memory.
And I mean, so there are some complex concepts and ideas in the book, and a lot of amazing educational researchers that you cite, like Rosenshine and some fantastic stuff that we've used a lot here. Have there been any kind of misconceptions out there from teachers that have said, oh, you got that wrong, or you didn't develop that enough, or that kind of thing?
I think there's always an argument with one pages that they're too brief, and they deliver misconceptions because of that brevity. So I've had a couple of people say that, you know, these one pages are actually instilling lethal mutations.
A Dylan William term, isn't it?
Yeah, and Dylan William coined the term lethal mutation, which means that when an idea is passed on, it turns into something else which wasn't intended to be, and it becomes less powerful. So lots of people do raise that, or should I say some people raise that and say, you know, look, this is causing lethal mutations because teachers are reading it and misinterpreting it because the full detail is not there. But I guess the point with one pages is they're a starting point. You know, they are essentially a point of reference which teachers then can look into further if they wish, and which is why I put on each summary that read more. You know, read extra on this by looking at the book or looking at the paper, listening to the podcast as well. We've got lots of educators sharing their knowledge via podcasts as well. So yeah, I guess that's probably the main pushback from one pages is it could lead to potential misunderstandings. But if it's a starting point and you use it effectively, you would naturally want to dig into the research yourself.
Now, you've written a second book as well. And I'm also curious to ask, once you've written a book and it's done very well and you think, wow, I can do this, do you then, is your mind on the horizon of what's the next cool idea that I can communicate as an educator?
I've already thought of the third one. So,
Okay. There you go.
Yeah, no, it gets easier because you start to see, you know, a vision for the collection. And it also gets easier because I've got the template from the first one, so I can just, you know, use the same structure and the same ideas. But I guess it comes down to, you know, what your teachers want as well. You know, what works. For the second book, I've decided to go with a similar framework. So there are 3 collections, and this time I've taken Tom Sherrington's work on the learning rainforest. So one section is on culture and establishing the conditions for growth. The second section is Mode A teaching, which is about the trunk of a tree, if you like, and thinking about the solid knowledge base that we need to learn and I'll give students to build schema in long-term memory. And then the Mode B stuff is, I guess, the exploration part of the model, which would be like exploring through discovery, inquiry, creativity. So there's a real balance in the new book, which I guess you could say, in a sense, the first one doesn't have as much. So I'm really excited to see how people perceive that, because people have been asking for more of the Mode B stuff as well, you know, because teaching, you have to have a blend of experiences for students. It's not all about instruction. There should be a portion of the curriculum as well where students can discover and can create and can have some autonomy in the learning as well.
Yeah, do you find that there's a bit of a culture war emerging in that sense between sort of the heavy content, explicit, and the sort of discovery/inquiry kind of line? Is that your view? Or?
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a massive war online all the time about it. Like trads and progressives, you know, this kind of debate whether instructional teaching is better than discovery, you know, and in the book I'm trying to argue the case, a little bit like Tom Sherrington does as well, that there's a place for both. You know, the curriculum should be a blend of everything. But saying that, you know, the core thing and the core business that we're here for is to instruct students on how to build knowledge and develop their ideas. So I think the Mode A stuff is important and probably in that sense more important, but definitely blending and sprinkling some Mode B opportunities throughout the curriculum is key as well. So I'm massive on, you know, high impact teaching strategies and instructional strategies, especially like the principles of teaching, like modeling, scaffolding, questioning, you know, and feedback, things like that.
Yeah, the Rose and Shine stuff.
Rose and Shine in a nutshell.
And I note that throughout the book you are doffing your cap or tipping your hat to all the thought leaders that you've obviously lent on a little bit to bring this to bear. It's good.
Yeah, to name a few, Daniel Willingham, you know, that Why Don't Students Like School? It's a
great book.
Probably the one book I'd recommend all teachers should read. Yeah. And he's not even an educator, right? So he's a cognitive scientist. And he just puts it in very simple terms, you know, how learning happens. So the diagram I use in this book is actually taken from Daniel Willingham's Why Don't Students Like School? Obviously, it looks a bit different and there's a bit more kind of unpacking for it, but it's about working memory, long-term memory, and attention, and the environment as well, the classroom environment. So he puts it in very plain terms. And yeah, I'd say if I had to say he's one inspiration, I'd probably say, yeah, he's probably one of the main ones for me. Yeah.
And has this book got a fair bit of traction in the US as well as I'm assuming it has done in Australia and the UK, but the US as well? Have you heard much from the teachers over there?
Definitely the UK, and I'd say the UK more than Australia, primarily because the following I have on social media is UK based. Australia as well. I'm speaking at a couple of conferences and, using these ideas for the basis of it. In the US, I think it's gaining traction. It has had some pockets of, where people have used it and implemented it in the school. But probably the main core demographic, if you like, of people who are using it are definitely the UK teachers.
Okay.
Mm.
And if you were to sort of pick an ideal scenario of how your book is leveraged and used, what would that look like for you in a school that says, right, we're going full bore into this space? What would it look like in your kind of ideal scenario?
I think as we've kind of mentioned and alluded to before, our goal as PD leaders, for example, or leaders in a school, is to inspire a culture where people are kind of talking about teaching and thriving by having conversations about what works. So any format that you implement into a school which facilitates that is perfect for one-pagers. So I mentioned and alluded to 15-minute forums before. Like, teachers can use it in very casual ways and have, a PD on a morning, like we're going to do in my school, where we have breakfast, a presenter, and this could form the content of a 15-minute chat, a 15-minute talk, a 15-minute presentation. And that's pretty much what I did last year, actually, at my school. I took some ideas from the book, turned it into a 15-minute presentation, and then, a conversation afterwards over a coffee and breakfast. So a very kind of informal PD it's very good for. But if you want to weave it into coaching as well, you can do, because this has lots of ideas and strategies that you can use in coaching meetings to, think about your next step, your action step, and to refine your practice. And again, it's that conversation starter.
And I guess you could also use it to concretize a conversation you've had in a coaching. If you're saying, well, we're talking about checking for understanding today, and then there's a whole page on this, it would be a good supportive kind of process.
That's the beauty of all the John Catt books as well, because it's the same publisher as like Walkthroughs, for example, and they're super practical. You can pick them up. They're very visual. They're very kind of distilled and concise. And Walkthroughs is the same. You can use it for an instructional coaching program. It's not dense, it's not too heavy, and it gets to the heart of the strategies that people use day in, day out, but also kind of reframes them and refocuses them, because people kind of take it for granted that they can do questioning in classrooms, but they don't always know the nuances of it, like cold calling, for example, and ensuring that all students are thinking through cold calling. So it's kind of, putting it into a frame of how learning happens and the cognitive science behind it as well.
Okay, so I've got kind of one final question, and then I know, Richard, you've got another one for you, Jamie. Before we get to our quickfire questions, which is the fun, snappy part of the interview.
Yep.
AI, right? You can't sort of have a conversation about all of this without introducing the seismic impact that AI is having in teaching. What role do you think it's going to play, and do you think the principles that you espouse in this book and hold true in a world sort of blanketed by new AI technologies in the classroom?
I see AI currently as a tool that can enhance our practice in the classroom, something that potentially could streamline the way we work as well. Because again, coming back to the idea that teachers are really busy, I think I see in like 5 or 10 years or whatever that a lot of the workload that we complain about, like marking or data entry or anything along those lines, AI could probably help with that, and help reduce the workload. That's my kind of like wish anyway.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah, the Holy Grail. That would be perfect, because then we as teachers can focus on, again, what we're there for, which is the teaching and learning part, which often sometimes we get, sidetracked with. And I think the key concept, like you said, of modeling, scaffolding, questioning, and the nuance of it can really, is really important for teachers. And I don't think AI will ever replace that because I think it's about relationships in the classroom as well. And I think, I guess computers can't do that, right? Yeah.
And I guess my last question is similar in some sense. It is kind of future look forward. But if there's one thing that you could see that could improve the quality of schooling in Western Australia, there's one thing that we could implement or de-implement, which is quite a big word.
Yeah.
What would it be? What would you like to push for to see an improvement in schooling?
At a system level, I think people are already kind of cottoning onto it, but it would be, again, the science of learning, especially in Western Australia. I think that some states are further ahead.
Absolutely.
New South Wales, Melbourne, they have a lot more kind of like forward-thinking leaders at system level, in the sense that they are putting guides out to schools, about how learning happens, and guides on how to do explicit modelling, worked examples. I actually worked with the Victorian Education Department last year to develop some guides. So I kind of know a bit of the ins and outs of what their plans are and what they're thinking. And it's very structured, it's very much based in the elements that are in this book, that are in the UK kind of context as well, where they're talking about the cognitive science of learning. So I think if I had to change something, it would be to push that more, to kind of make all teachers aware of how learning happens. Make it part of the teacher training as well. When I was taught to be a teacher and went through teacher training, I never learned any of that. So I didn't know anything about the brain. I didn't know anything about working memory or long-term memory. It was all about like engagement in the classroom. What can I do to engage the kids, and what activity can I do in the classroom? And I guess like when you observe classes nowadays and you walk through schools, people often mistake engagement and writing and quiet classrooms for learning. And in actual fact, you can't. It's not visible is learning, but you can ensure that all students are thinking and all students are participating. So I guess that comes from my understanding of cognitive science. So I'd push that definitely.
Cool. All right, Jamie, thank you so much for coming into Studio Scotch. This has been fantastic, and it's been a real insight, not just hearing about the ideas you've got in this book, but the ideas you've got for professional development for your own staff and all that kind of thing. So we really appreciate you coming in and sharing some of your insights with us.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
But you can't get out of here just yet. So,
No.
So quick fire questions. First one.
Yeah.
Deserted Island, favorite album. What if you could take one album with you?
Yeah, these are hard, aren't they? I'll probably take like the Beatles Essentials. I know it's not an album as such; it's a playlist, right? So it's a playlist that I have on Apple Music. Best band ever. So the Beatles. Yeah,
bold statement, but well supported.
Yeah.
Some evidence to support that. Evidence based.
As an informed decision. Yeah.
Okay. Next one is, what habit in the last 3 years have you formed that's been of benefit to you?
Habit I've formed. I would say reading. It's probably a dull answer, but reading, and just reading for enjoyment, but mainly reading educational literature and blogs, and been involved in that space, but sharing ideas online as well through that. Yeah.
I was going to ask you if there is a book or a couple of books that you could recommend. What would they be? You've already mentioned Dylan Willingham's. Are there any others that you could offer our audience?
Yeah, so Daniel Willingham, Why Don't Students Like School, which I mentioned.
Yep.
The other ones as well, which I would probably say are The Learning Rainforest, which I did mention earlier as well, which is Tom Sherrington's book. And I'll just go for a trio, and I'll think of another one off the top of my head. I'm a big fan of visualization and graphic organizers and stuff. So I actually, I contributed to a book called, what was it called now? Organize Ideas. Organize Ideas is called, by Oliver Caviglioli and David Goodwin. It's about graphic organizers. It's brilliant.
And he works a lot with Sherrington, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's Tom Sherrington's illustrator. They work together on teaching walkthroughs. Yeah.
All right. So, Jamie, thank you so much for coming in. Really appreciate it. And thanks for your time and all the best for the future with your book writing and your educational life in general.
Thank you so much. It's been great. Thank you.
Cheers, Jamie.
Thanks,
cheers.
Thank you.